Three popular students thought they could humiliate the quiet scholarship girl by publicly slapping her in front of the entire school. What they didn't know was that Sarah Chen had been training in traditional Shotokan karate since she was 4 years old and held a second-degree black belt that she'd earned through years of discipline and dedication. This is the story of how one moment of cruelty revealed a strength that changed everything at Westfield Academy forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Chen pressed her shoulder against the cool brick wall of the main hallway at Westfield Academy, watching the morning chaos unfold around her, like a carefully orchestrated dance she had never been invited to join. 6 weeks into her junior year at the prestigious private school, and she still felt like an outsider looking through glass at a world she could observe but never truly enter. The scholarship that had brought her here from her modest neighborhood across town came with academic expectations that left little time for the social networking that seemed to define success at Westfield Academy. At 16, Sarah possessed the kind of understated presence that made her nearly invisible in crowded spaces, which served her well in an environment where standing out often meant becoming a target. She stood just over 5 feet 4 inches with straight black hair that she kept pulled back in a practical ponytail, dark brown eyes that missed nothing despite her quiet demeanor, and an economy of movement that spoke of years of disciplined training that none of her classmates knew about. Her clothes were always clean and well-maintained, but clearly purchased from discount stores rather than the designer boutiques that supplied most of Westfield Academy's student body. The morning rush between first and second period created a river of wealth and privilege that flowed around Sarah like water around a stone. Students moved through their routines with the casual confidence that came from never having to worry about tuition payments, scholarship requirements, or part-time jobs that helped support their families. Sarah watched them with the careful observation skills that her sensei had taught her during years of studying not just physical techniques, but the mental discipline that made martial arts a way of life, rather than simply a collection of fighting moves. Westfield Academy attracted the children of senators, business executives, entertainment industry professionals, and old money families whose names appeared on buildings throughout the city. The campus itself reflected this affluence with its manicured grounds, state-of-the-art facilities, and architecture that suggested academic excellence through environmental design. Gothic Revival buildings housed classrooms equipped with the latest technology, while expansive athletic facilities provided opportunities for every sport imaginable. The library contained more resources than most universities, and the science laboratories were equipped with equipment that rivaled research institutions. Sarah's presence at Westfield Academy represented an achievement that had required years of academic excellence, community service, and standardized test scores that placed her in the 99th percentile nationally. The full scholarship she had earned covered not only tuition, but also books, supplies, and even a modest allowance for school-related expenses. However, the financial support came with academic requirements that demanded maintaining a grade point average above 3.8 while participating in extracurricular activities that demonstrated leadership potential and community engagement. The social ecosystem at Westfield Academy operated according to unwritten rules that Sarah had learned to navigate through careful observation rather than direct participation. The student body naturally segregated into distinct groups based on family wealth, social connections, and perceived status within the broader community. The apex predators of this hierarchy moved through the hallways with the kind of casual authority that came from never having their decisions questioned or their behavior challenged by consequences that might affect their futures. Victoria Sterling commanded attention wherever she went, her presence announced by the soft whisper of expensive fabric and the subtle glint of jewelry that cost more than most families spent on housing in a year. Tall and elegant with platinum blonde hair that caught every ray of available light, Victoria possessed the kind of classical beauty that graced magazine covers and charitable organization promotional materials. Her family owned Sterling Enterprises, a real estate development company that had shaped the city's skyline for 3 generations, giving Victoria a level of social influence that extended far beyond the boundaries of Westfield Academy. Victoria's aesthetic choices reflected both impeccable taste and unlimited resources. Her uniforms were custom-tailored versions of the school's required dress code, crafted from superior fabrics, and fitted by designers who charged more for alterations than most students paid for their entire wardrobes. She accessorized within the school's regulations but managed to convey wealth and status through subtle details that separated her from students whose families merely had money rather than true social position. But Victoria's real power came not from her appearance or her family's wealth, but from an intuitive understanding of social dynamics that allowed her to manipulate situations and people with surgical precision. She possessed the ability to identify weakness, insecurity, and vulnerability in others while projecting an image of perfection that made her criticisms seem like objective observations rather than calculated attacks. Her smile could make someone feel included in an exclusive world, or excluded from basic human dignity, depending on her assessment of their value to her social objectives. Marcus Thompson orbited around Victoria like a satellite, his massive athletic frame and quarterback confidence providing the perfect complement to her social dominance. At 6 feet 3 inches with broad shoulders that strained against his school blazer, Marcus possessed the kind of physical presence that commanded respect through intimidation, even when he wasn't trying to be threatening. His dark hair was always perfectly styled, his smile carried the practiced charm of someone who had been told he was special since childhood, and his academic performance was adequate enough to maintain his position on the varsity football team that served as his primary source of identity and social status. Marcus's family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships throughout the state, providing him with both financial resources and access to vehicles that served as symbols of his elevated status within the student hierarchy. His casual arrogance stemmed from years of being celebrated for his athletic achievements while being shielded from meaningful consequences for behavior that might have derailed the futures of students with less social protection. Teachers overlooked his academic shortcomings because of his contributions to the school's athletic reputation, while administrators ignored disciplinary issues that might have resulted in suspension for less connected students. The third member of Victoria's inner circle was Brittany Walsh, whose role in their group dynamic was more complex and potentially more dangerous than either Victoria's calculated cruelty or Marcus's straightforward intimidation. Petite and fashionable with auburn hair that she wore in elaborate styles that required professional maintenance, Brittany documented their activities with the dedication of a war correspondent and the technical sophistication of a professional media producer. Her expensive camera equipment never left her hands, and her social media accounts commanded followings that extended far beyond Westfield Academy's student body. Brittany's cruelty was different from her friends, born not from natural malice or simple aggression, but from a desperate fear of losing her position within Victoria's hierarchy. Her family's wealth was newer and less established than Victoria's generational influence or Marcus's athletic celebrity, making her status within the group dependent on her continued usefulness rather than her inherent value. This insecurity drove her to document and amplify every interaction, every slight, and every social victory in ways that transformed private moments of cruelty into public entertainment that could destroy reputations and social standing with viral efficiency. Sarah's first-period advanced placement chemistry class provided a welcome respite from the social complexities of Westfield Academy's hallways. Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, a brilliant educator who had earned her doctorate from Stanford before choosing to dedicate her career to inspiring the next generation of scientists, ran her classroom with intellectual rigor that Sarah found both challenging and comforting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The laboratory was equipped with equipment that rivaled university research facilities, and Dr. Martinez's expectations were pitched at a level that prepared her students for success in the most competitive academic environments. Sarah had chosen a lab station near the back corner of the room, positioning herself where she could observe the entire classroom while maintaining easy access to both the main exit and the emergency door that led to the courtyard. Years of martial arts training had instilled habits of situational awareness that extended far beyond the dojo, creating an automatic assessment of environment, escape routes, and potential threats that operated below the level of conscious thought. Her sensei had taught her that true martial artists were distinguished not by their ability to fight, but by their ability to avoid unnecessary conflicts through preparation and awareness. Her lab partner was David Kim, a quiet sophomore with intelligent dark eyes and an aptitude for chemistry that rivaled Sarah's own academic capabilities. David reminded Sarah of some of the younger students at her dojo, respectful without being intimidated, curious about scientific principles without being pushy about personal details, and focused on learning rather than social positioning. Their partnership worked efficiently because both understood that academic success required dedication and mutual support, rather than competition or social drama. Dr. Martinez's lesson on molecular orbital theory challenged even the most academically gifted students in the class, requiring them to visualize complex three-dimensional relationships between atoms and electrons that determined chemical behavior. Sarah found herself genuinely engaged with the material, appreciating the logical structure of scientific principles that operated according to predictable rules, rather than the arbitrary social dynamics that governed most interactions at Westfield Academy. In chemistry, results were determined by precise measurements and proper technique rather than family connections or social status. The period passed peacefully, with Sarah and David successfully completing their assigned synthesis reaction while maintaining the kind of comfortable working relationship that didn't require constant conversation or social validation. Sarah appreciated David's focus and competence, qualities that reminded her of the best training partners at her dojo, where excellence was measured by dedication and improvement rather than by defeating others or claiming superior status. When the bell rang signaling the end of first period, Sarah felt genuinely disappointed to leave the ordered environment of the chemistry laboratory. Science represented a refuge from the unpredictable social warfare that characterized most aspects of life at Westfield Academy, providing intellectual challenges that rewarded hard work and careful thinking rather than manipulation and social positioning. Second period brought advanced placement United States history with Professor Jonathan Hayes, a passionate educator who approached his subject with the kind of scholarly enthusiasm that made even the most reluctant students appreciate the complexity and relevance of historical events. Professor Hayes had earned his master's degree from Georgetown University and possessed the rare ability to connect historical patterns with contemporary issues in ways that made the past feel immediate and important, rather than distant and irrelevant. Sarah had managed to avoid most group projects during her first 6 weeks at Westfield Academy, but today's assignment on the Industrial Revolution required partnerships that Professor Hayes insisted on selecting through random distribution, rather than allowing students to choose their own collaborators. This approach was designed to prevent the formation of exclusive groups while encouraging students to work with classmates they might not ordinarily engage with socially. Sarah found herself paired with Michael Rodriguez, a thoughtful junior who approached academic work with the same methodical precision that characterized Sarah's own study habits. Michael possessed the kind of intellectual curiosity that made him genuinely interested in understanding historical cause and effect relationships, rather than simply memorizing facts for examinations. Their discussion of labor conditions during the late 19th century revealed Michael's ability to connect economic theory with human consequences in ways that demonstrated both academic sophistication and genuine empathy for historical subjects. Their collaboration proceeded smoothly as they outlined a presentation on technological innovation and its impact on working-class communities during the period between 1870 and 1910. Michael's research skills complemented Sarah's analytical abilities, and they managed to develop a thesis that satisfied Professor Hayes's requirements while avoiding the kind of personal disclosure that might compromise Sarah's carefully maintained privacy about her family background and financial circumstances. The assignment required them to examine primary source documents including factory workers' testimonies, newspaper accounts of labor disputes, and government reports on industrial working conditions. Sarah found herself drawing unexpected parallels between the historical struggles of workers fighting for dignity and fair treatment and her own experience navigating social hierarchies that seemed designed to exclude anyone who lacked the proper credentials or connections. Michael proved to be more perceptive than his quiet demeanor initially suggested, and their partnership developed into the kind of intellectually stimulating collaboration that Sarah had hoped to find at Westfield Academy. He was genuinely interested in her perspectives on economic inequality and social mobility, and he shared insights about historical patterns that demonstrated both academic preparation and independent thinking that went beyond textbook knowledge. When the class period ended, Sarah and Michael had established the foundation for a presentation that would meet Professor Hayes's high standards while showcasing their individual strengths and collaborative abilities. Sarah appreciated Michael's respectful approach to partnership and his focus on academic excellence rather than social positioning or personal curiosity about her background and circumstances. Third period advanced placement English literature with Miss Patricia Williams provided another opportunity for Sarah to excel in an academic environment that rewarded intellectual engagement rather than social connections. Ms. Williams was a dedicated educator who had earned her master's degree in comparative literature from Columbia University and possessed the rare ability to make classic texts feel relevant and immediate to contemporary students. Today's discussion focused on themes of social class and individual agency in Charles Dickens's Great Expectations, a novel that resonated with Sarah's own experience of navigating between different social worlds while maintaining her personal integrity and values. Ms. Williams encouraged students to examine how Pip's journey from humble origins to gentleman status reflected both the opportunities and corruptions that accompanied social mobility in Victorian England. Sarah found herself raising her hand more frequently than usual, as the discussion explored questions about whether true transformation required abandoning one's origins, or whether authentic success meant remaining connected to one's foundational values and relationships. Her contributions to the conversation were thoughtful and well-articulated, drawing connections between Dickens's social criticism and contemporary issues of inequality and opportunity that demonstrated both literary sophistication and real-world awareness. Ms. Williams noticed Sarah's engagement with the material and made several encouraging comments about her analytical insights and her ability to connect historical literature with modern social dynamics. Sarah appreciated the teacher's recognition of her academic capabilities, while also feeling somewhat self-conscious about drawing attention that might make her more visible to classmates who preferred to ignore scholarship students rather than acknowledge their intellectual contributions. The class discussion revealed interesting perspectives from several students whose family backgrounds provided them with different insights into questions of wealth, privilege, and social responsibility. Some students approached the material from positions of inherited advantage that made them defensive about implications of unearned privilege, while others demonstrated genuine curiosity about experiences different from their own sheltered circumstances. Sarah's analysis of Pip's relationship with Joe Gargery particularly impressed Ms. Williams because it demonstrated understanding of how social climbing could corrupt fundamental relationships and values. Her observation that Pip's greatest moral failing was his shame about the people who had loved and supported him during his humble beginnings resonated with several classmates who were beginning to recognize similar patterns in their own attitudes toward family members or friends who lacked social sophistication. When the period ended, Ms. Williams approached Sarah's desk with genuine enthusiasm about her participation in the discussion and her sophisticated analysis of the novel's themes. The teacher's encouragement felt meaningful to Sarah because it was based on academic merit rather than sympathy for her financial circumstances or efforts to be inclusively supportive of diversity within the student body. Fourth period brought advanced calculus with Dr. Robert Chen, a mathematics professor who had transferred to Westfield Academy after spending 15 years teaching at the university level. Dr. Chen approached mathematics with the kind of theoretical rigor that prepared students for success in competitive undergraduate programs, while maintaining the practical applications that made abstract concepts feel relevant and useful. Sarah's aptitude for mathematics had been evident since elementary school, and her ability to visualize complex relationships between variables and functions made calculus feel like a natural extension of her analytical thinking rather than an intimidating challenge. She had positioned herself in the second row where she could clearly see Dr. Chen's detailed explanations while maintaining good situational awareness of the classroom environment. The lesson focused on applications of derivatives to optimization problems, requiring students to use mathematical analysis to find maximum and minimum values for real-world scenarios involving business, engineering, and scientific applications. Sarah found the logical progression from abstract mathematical principles to practical problem-solving both intellectually satisfying and professionally relevant, as she was beginning to consider potential college majors that would combine her analytical abilities with her interest in helping others. Dr. Chen's teaching style emphasized understanding underlying principles rather than memorizing formulas, encouraging students to develop mathematical intuition that would serve them well in advanced undergraduate coursework. Sarah appreciated this approach because it aligned with her sensei's philosophy about martial arts training, where true mastery came from understanding fundamental principles rather than simply memorizing techniques or combinations. The peaceful atmosphere of mathematics class provided Sarah with another refuge from the social complexities that characterized most aspects of life at Westfield Academy. Numbers and equations operated according to logical rules that didn't change based on family wealth or social connections, creating an environment where excellence was determined by understanding and application rather than privilege or manipulation. However, Sarah's sense of academic sanctuary was disrupted when Brittany Walsh entered the classroom 15 minutes late with an elaborate excuse about a student government emergency that had required her immediate attention. Sarah's awareness immediately focused on Brittany's movement as she selected an empty desk directly behind Sarah's position, creating a surveillance opportunity that felt deliberately chosen rather than coincidentally available. Dr. Chen accepted Brittany's explanation with the kind of resigned tolerance that suggested this wasn't the first time one of Victoria's group had disrupted his class with mysterious emergencies that somehow never resulted in meaningful consequences. He resumed his explanation of optimization techniques, but Sarah found it difficult to concentrate with Brittany's presence behind her, creating the sensation of being observed and evaluated. The harassment began subtly, with Brittany dropping her pencil multiple times and bumping Sarah's chair while retrieving it, each contact brief enough to appear accidental, but frequent enough to create a pattern of disruption that Sarah recognized as deliberate psychological pressure. Brittany's phone appeared periodically, capturing images that were supposedly of the blackboard, but actually documented Sarah's appearance, belongings, and reactions to the ongoing surveillance. Sarah forced herself to maintain normal behavior patterns despite the intensive observation, continuing to take notes and participate in class discussions while mentally preparing for whatever escalation might follow this intelligence-gathering operation. Her martial arts training had taught her to recognize when opponents were studying her movements and responses, gathering information that would be used to identify weaknesses or predict reactions during future confrontations. When Dr. Chen assigned practice problems for individual work, Brittany began a whispered commentary that was clearly intended for Sarah's benefit, despite being addressed to the student sitting beside her. The commentary included observations about scholarship students who thought they belonged at Westfield Academy, and speculation about families who couldn't afford proper clothes or school supplies but somehow managed to pretend they fit in with their social superiors. Sarah's self-control was tested as Brittany's psychological warfare continued throughout the remainder of the class period, but her years of martial arts training had taught her to maintain mental discipline even under pressure. Her sensei had repeatedly emphasized that true strength was demonstrated, not through aggressive responses to provocation, but through the ability to remain calm and focused regardless of external circumstances. The final bell of the morning couldn't come soon enough for Sarah, who had spent the last hour of calculus class feeling like a specimen under a microscope, while Brittany documented her every reaction and response. When Dr. Chen dismissed the class, Sarah packed her belongings with deliberate calm while Brittany hurried out ahead of her, undoubtedly rushing to report her observations to Victoria and Marcus before their next coordinated operation. The walk to her locker took Sarah through hallways that now felt charged with potential conflict, as word spread about Brittany's surveillance activities and speculation mounted about what Victoria's group might be planning. Sarah's carefully maintained invisibility had been compromised, and she knew from experience that predators were most dangerous when they had identified their targets and begun actively planning their attacks. Sarah's locker was positioned in a section of the main hallway that she had selected specifically for its visibility to faculty members and proximity to administrative offices, reasoning that public locations would provide some protection from the kind of harassment that thrived in isolated areas. However, she was beginning to understand that Victoria Sterling's influence at Westfield Academy extended far beyond normal student authority, and that traditional protections might not be sufficient against someone with her family's resources and social connections. As Sarah exchanged her morning textbooks for lunch and afternoon supplies, she became aware of increased attention from passing students who were clearly discussing her situation while trying to appear casual about their interest. The social ecosystem at Westfield Academy was highly attuned to shifts in power dynamics, and word was spreading that Victoria Sterling had identified a new target for her sophisticated psychological operations. The lunch period at Westfield Academy took place in a dining facility that more closely resembled an upscale restaurant than a typical school cafeteria, with multiple serving stations offering cuisine that reflected the international backgrounds and sophisticated tastes of the student body. Students could choose from sushi, Mediterranean dishes, gourmet sandwiches, and organic salads prepared by professional chefs who took pride in creating meals that met both nutritional requirements and aesthetic expectations. Sarah typically brought her lunch from home, partly to save money and partly to avoid the social dynamics that characterized the dining hall, where seating arrangements reflected and reinforced the school's complex hierarchy. She had developed a routine of eating quickly in a small courtyard adjacent to the library, where she could review homework assignments while enjoying fresh air and natural light without navigating the social complexities of the main dining facility. Today's plan was disrupted when Michael Rodriguez approached her table in the courtyard with his own lunch tray and a slightly nervous expression that suggested he was aware of the social risks involved in associating with someone who had attracted Victoria Sterling's attention. Sarah appreciated Michael's courage in reaching out despite the potential consequences, recognizing that genuine friendship required the willingness to support others even when it might create personal complications. "Mind if I join you?" Michael asked, though his expression made it clear that he was hoping Sarah would welcome his company despite the obvious social pressures that made their association potentially problematic for both of them. "The main dining hall feels like a zoo today, and I prefer eating somewhere I can actually have a conversation." Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her, noting that Michael's presence immediately attracted attention from students passing through the courtyard who were clearly surprised to see someone voluntarily associating with Victoria Sterling's latest target. Their lunch conversation proceeded naturally as they discussed their morning classes and shared perspectives on academic challenges that required genuine intellectual engagement rather than social positioning. Michael proved to be an excellent conversationalist with interests that extended far beyond academic requirements to include community service activities, environmental issues, and social justice causes that reflected both personal conviction and genuine concern for problems affecting people outside Westfield Academy's privileged bubble. Sarah found his perspective refreshing after weeks of exposure to classmates whose primary concerns seemed to center on social status and material consumption. Their discussion was interrupted when Victoria Sterling approached their table with Marcus and Brittany flanking her in a formation that Sarah immediately recognized as tactically significant. Victoria's smile was radiant and absolutely predatory as she positioned herself where her voice would carry clearly across the courtyard, while Marcus and Brittany created psychological pressure through their strategic positioning. "Sarah Chen," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the courtyard with theatrical precision designed to ensure maximum audience attention for whatever performance she was about to deliver. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Victoria Sterling, and I basically determine the social atmosphere around here." Sarah's response was carefully neutral, acknowledging Victoria's introduction without providing information that could be used for future psychological warfare or manipulation. "Nice to meet you," she said, maintaining eye contact while tracking Marcus and Brittany's positions through her peripheral vision in case the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation. Victoria's laugh was like crystal breaking, beautiful and sharp enough to draw blood. "Oh, sweetie, I'm sure you think it's nice, but I'm not actually here for pleasantries. You see, I've been observing your little adjustment period here at Westfield Academy, and I'm concerned that you might not understand how things work in our community." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to establish Victoria's dominance, while simultaneously insulting both Sarah's intelligence and her social status. Sarah recognized the technique as sophisticated psychological warfare that was intended to provoke either aggressive responses that would justify retaliation or submissive behavior that would confirm her position as a viable target for ongoing harassment. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly recognizing the danger inherent in Victoria's approach, while also demonstrating loyalty to his friendship with Sarah, despite the personal risks involved in opposing someone with Victoria Sterling's influence and resources. His presence provided moral support for Sarah, while also making him a potential secondary target for Victoria's psychological operations. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system as her body automatically prepared for potential conflict. "But I think I'm managing the adjustment process just fine." Victoria's expression shifted slightly as if she hadn't expected such direct resistance to her psychological assault. Most students at Westfield Academy had learned to respond to Victoria's dominance displays with either immediate submission or desperate attempts to appease her through flattery and social positioning. Sarah's calm refusal to be intimidated represented a challenge to Victoria's authority that could not be ignored without undermining her carefully maintained image of invincibility. "Managing just fine?" Victoria repeated, her tone suggesting that Sarah's response was somehow amusing in ways that she couldn't possibly understand. "Sweetie, you're here on scholarship charity, essentially while wearing clothes from discount stores and pretending you belong in the same environment as people whose families have been shaping this community for generations. That's not managing fine, that's living in denial." The attack was perfectly calibrated to strike at every aspect of Sarah's situation that might create feelings of insecurity or inadequacy, Victoria had identified Sarah's scholarship status, her family's financial limitations, and her outsider position within Westfield Academy's social hierarchy, using this information to construct a psychological assault designed to destroy confidence and social standing simultaneously. Sarah felt her sensei's voice in her mind, reminding her that true martial artists were distinguished by their ability to remain calm under pressure and to respond to aggression with wisdom rather than anger. Master Tanaka had taught her that the strongest opponents were often those who could control their emotions and think clearly, even when being deliberately provoked by enemies who hoped to trigger reactive mistakes. My family taught me that belonging somewhere has more to do with character and contribution than with bank account balances or family history, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard despite its measured tone. I'm here because I earned it through academic achievement, and I plan to make the most of the opportunity. Victoria's smile became even more predatory as she realized that Sarah was not going to be easily intimidated through conventional social pressure tactics. Character and contribution, she repeated mockingly. How wonderfully naive. Let me explain something about the real world, scholarship girl. Character doesn't pay tuition. Contribution doesn't buy proper clothes. And academic achievement means nothing if you don't understand your place in the social order. Marcus stepped closer, using his size to create additional psychological pressure while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. The thing is, he said, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that suggested he was accustomed to using physical intimidation to resolve disagreements. Some people need help understanding how things work around here. We'd hate to see you make mistakes that might affect your scholarship status. The implied threat was delivered with perfect deniability, phrased as helpful advice rather than direct intimidation. However, Sarah's martial arts training had taught her to recognize aggression in all its forms, and Marcus's approach represented a significant escalation from Victoria's psychological warfare toward the possibility of actual physical confrontation. Brittany remained slightly behind the other two, with her phone positioned to capture whatever happened next for later distribution through social media channels. Sarah noted that Brittany's documentation was probably intended for maximum humiliation value, creating permanent records of Sarah's degradation that could be used for ongoing psychological torture and social destruction. I appreciate your advice, Sarah said, her voice remaining calm despite the escalating nature of the confrontation. But I think I can handle whatever challenges come up during my time here. Victoria's expression hardened as she realized that her standard intimidation tactics were not producing the desired results. Sarah's refusal to show fear or submission was beginning to attract attention from other students in the courtyard, who were clearly surprised to witness someone openly resisting Victoria Sterling's psychological dominance. We'll see about that, Victoria said, her voice taking on the kind of cold precision that Sarah recognized from opponents who were transitioning from psychological warfare to more direct forms of aggression. Some lessons can only be learned through experience, and I think your education at Westfield Academy is about to become much more comprehensive. The dismissal was clear, but Sarah understood that it represented a tactical withdrawal rather than an end to hostilities. Victoria Sterling had just declared war, and Sarah found herself in the familiar position of being targeted by predators who had no idea what they were actually dealing with. As Victoria's group walked away from the courtyard, Sarah could feel the electric tension that preceded significant conflicts. Students throughout the area were already spreading news of the confrontation, and she knew that by the end of the day, everyone at Westfield Academy would know that the scholarship girl had refused to submit to Victoria Sterling's authority. Michael remained at the table, his face pale but his expression determined. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you don't have to face this alone. Victoria's family has a lot of influence, but there are people here who believe in doing what's right, regardless of social pressure." Sarah looked at Michael's earnest face and felt grateful for his loyalty, despite the risks involved in supporting someone who had just made an enemy of the most powerful student at Westfield Academy. She thought about her sensei's teachings regarding the importance of protecting others and standing up for principles that mattered more than personal convenience. "Thanks, Michael," Sarah said simply. "That means more than you know." The remainder of the lunch period passed quietly, as Sarah and Michael finished their meals while surrounded by the kind of charged atmosphere that preceded significant battles. Sarah's mind was already shifting into the strategic thinking mode that her martial arts training had developed, analyzing the tactical implications of Victoria's declaration of war and considering her options for responding to whatever escalation was certain to follow. Fifth period brought advanced physics with Dr. Amanda Foster, a brilliant educator who had earned her doctorate from MIT before choosing to inspire the next generation of scientists at Westfield Academy. Dr. Foster's classroom was equipped with demonstration equipment that allowed students to observe physical principles in action, while developing mathematical models that explained natural phenomena with precision and elegance. Sarah usually enjoyed physics class because it provided intellectual challenges that rewarded logical thinking and careful observation rather than social manipulation or family connections. Today's lesson focused on momentum conservation and collision systems, concepts that Sarah understood both theoretically and practically through her martial arts training, though she was careful to keep her responses appropriately academic rather than revealing personal experience with applying physical principles to combat situations. The peaceful atmosphere of scientific inquiry was disrupted when Brittany Walsh arrived 20 minutes late with another elaborate excuse about student council responsibilities that required her immediate attention. Sarah's situational awareness immediately focused on Brittany's movement, as she claimed an empty desk with a clear view of Sarah's position, though this time Brittany made no attempt to hide her surveillance activities. Brittany spent the remainder of the physics class openly staring at Sarah, while taking notes that had nothing to do with momentum calculations or collision dynamics. Her phone appeared frequently, capturing images that were supposedly related to the lesson but actually documented Sarah's appearance, behavior, and reactions to the ongoing psychological pressure campaign. Dr. Foster noticed Brittany's behavior and made several pointed comments about the importance of focusing on scientific principles rather than social distractions, but Brittany ignored the warnings with the kind of casual disrespect that suggested she was confident about her protection from meaningful consequences. Her family's charitable contributions to Westfield Academy apparently provided immunity from normal disciplinary measures that might have applied to less well-connected students. Sarah forced herself to maintain normal participation in class discussions, despite feeling like she was being studied for weaknesses and vulnerabilities that would be exploited in future confrontations. Her years of martial arts training had taught her to perform effectively even under psychological pressure, but the intensity of Brittany's surveillance operation was creating stress that required conscious effort to manage. When the final bell rang, Sarah packed her belongings with deliberate calm while Brittany hurried out ahead of her, undoubtedly rushing to report her observations to Victoria and Marcus before their next coordinated attack. The walk to her locker took Sarah through hallways that now felt like a battlefield where every conversation might contain intelligence gathering, and every friendly interaction might be motivated by curiosity about her background rather than genuine social interest. Sarah's locker was surrounded by students who were clearly hoping to observe whatever confrontation Victoria Sterling was planning for the end of the day. The anticipation was palpable as word spread throughout Westfield Academy's social networks that something significant was about to happen between the scholarship girl who had refused to submit and the undisputed queen of the school's social hierarchy. As Sarah exchanged her afternoon textbooks for homework assignments and personal belongings, she became aware of Victoria Sterling approaching through the crowded hallway with Marcus and Brittany flanking her in the same tactical formation they had used during the lunch confrontation. However, this time their approach was supported by a larger group of followers who were clearly expecting to witness Victoria's public demonstration of dominance over someone who had dared to challenge her authority. The stage was set for whatever humiliation Victoria had planned, and Sarah found herself in the position of having to choose between backing down and maintaining the dignity that her sensei had taught her was more important than personal safety or social acceptance. Victoria Sterling's approach through the crowded hallway commanded immediate attention from every student within visual range, her designer heels clicking against the polished marble floors with the rhythm of a countdown timer approaching 0. The formation she maintained with Marcus and Brittany had been perfected through months of psychological warfare against previous targets, each member positioned to maximize intimidation while maintaining plausible deniability about their true intentions. Sarah recognized the tactical significance of their coordinated movement, noting how other students instinctively cleared pathways while positioning themselves to observe whatever confrontation was about to unfold. The audience that gathered around Sarah's locker represented a cross-section of Westfield Academy's social hierarchy, from underclassmen who had learned to fear Victoria's displeasure to upperclassmen who understood the entertainment value of watching someone's social destruction in real time. Their phones emerged automatically, creating a digital documentation network that would ensure whatever happened next would be preserved permanently and distributed widely throughout the school's social media ecosystem. Sarah closed her locker with deliberate precision, shouldering her backpack while maintaining the centered balance that years of martial arts training had made automatic under stress. Her sensei had taught her that true preparation involved not just physical readiness, but mental clarity that allowed warriors to respond appropriately regardless of the circumstances they faced. Master Tanaka's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that strength was demonstrated through wisdom and restraint, rather than through aggressive displays that revealed insecurity and lack of self-control. Victoria's smile was radiant and absolutely predatory as she positioned herself directly in front of Sarah's locker, close enough to invade personal space while far enough to avoid any accusation of physical aggression. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the hallway windows, creating an almost angelic appearance that contrasted sharply with the calculated cruelty in her blue eyes. She had dressed for this confrontation with extra care, her uniform tailored to perfection, and her makeup applied with professional precision that would photograph beautifully from any angle. "Sarah Chen," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet hallway with the kind of theatrical projection that suggested she was performing for an audience rather than having a private conversation. "I've been thinking about our discussion at lunch, and I realized that I may not have been clear enough about how things work here at Westfield Academy." The opening statement was perfectly crafted to establish Victoria's authority while creating the impression that Sarah had somehow misunderstood previous guidance rather than deliberately resisted psychological intimidation. Sarah recognized the verbal technique as sophisticated manipulation designed to make resistance appear unreasonable while positioning Victoria as a patient teacher dealing with a difficult student. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, his massive frame creating a shadow that fell across Sarah's position, while his expression suggested that he was looking forward to whatever demonstration Victoria had planned. His Letterman jacket bore the insignia of multiple athletic achievements, each trophy and medal representing not just personal accomplishment but social capital that translated into influence and protection within Westfield Academy's complex hierarchy. Brittany remained slightly behind and to the right, her professional quality camera equipment already active and recording everything from multiple angles. Her position allowed her to capture both Sarah's reactions and the audience's responses while maintaining enough distance to avoid being accidentally included in whatever physical confrontation might develop. Her social media expertise had taught her to anticipate viral moments and position herself to document them with maximum impact. "I thought you were pretty clear," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system as her body automatically prepared for potential conflict. "But I appreciate your concern for my understanding of the social environment here." Victoria's laugh was like wind chimes in a storm, beautiful and sharp enough to make people flinch. "Oh, sweetie, I don't think you understood at all. You see, Westfield Academy operates according to certain traditions and expectations that have been established over many years by families who built this institution and continue to support it through their generosity and leadership." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to emphasize Sarah's outsider status while establishing Victoria's family's historical connection to the school as justification for her authority over social dynamics. Sarah understood that Victoria was building a case for her right to determine acceptable behavior, while simultaneously highlighting Sarah's dependence on charity for her very presence at Westfield Academy. "Those traditions," Victoria continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a slow learner, "include respecting the natural social order that reflects real-world hierarchies based on family background, financial resources, and social connections that extend far beyond these hallways." Sarah's martial arts training had included extensive instruction in recognizing and countering psychological attacks that sought to undermine confidence and self-worth through systematic degradation of personal value and social position. Master Tanaka had taught his students that true strength came from understanding their own worth, rather than accepting others' definitions of their place in social hierarchies. "I understand that different families have different backgrounds," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite its measured tone. "But I thought educational institutions were supposed to be places where people were valued for their character and achievements rather than their parents' bank accounts." Quote, the response struck exactly the nerve Victoria had hoped to avoid, challenging the fundamental assumptions that justified her authority, while demonstrating that Sarah possessed both the intelligence and courage to articulate alternative perspectives on social value and institutional purpose. Victoria's expression flickered momentarily as she processed this unexpected resistance to her carefully constructed argument. Marcus stepped closer, using his size advantage to create additional psychological pressure while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. "The problem with that attitude," he said, his voice carrying the kind of condescending patience usually reserved for explaining things to small children, "is that it ignores reality about how the world actually works outside of these protective walls." His massive presence loomed over Sarah as he continued his explanation, clearly confident that physical intimidation would succeed where Victoria's verbal manipulation had failed to achieve complete submission. "Your academic achievements might get you through high school, but success in the real world requires understanding social dynamics and knowing your place in established hierarchies." Sarah's assessment of Marcus confirmed her initial evaluation of him as dangerous, primarily due to size and willingness to use physical intimidation, but lacking the intelligence or strategic thinking that would make him truly formidable in complex situations. His approach was based on the assumption that bigger size automatically translated to superior position, a misconception that her martial arts training had taught her to exploit when necessary. "I appreciate the career advice," Sarah replied, shifting her weight almost imperceptibly to improve her balance in case the situation escalated beyond verbal confrontation. "But I think success in any environment depends more on treating people with respect than on maintaining artificial hierarchies based on circumstances people didn't choose." Victoria's smile became even more predatory as she realized that Sarah was not going to be intimidated into submission through conventional pressure tactics. The scholarship girl's calm resistance to both psychological manipulation and physical intimidation was beginning to attract admiring attention from some observers, which threatened to undermine Victoria's carefully maintained image of invincibility. "Artificial hierarchies," Victoria repeated, her tone suggesting that Sarah's words revealed profound ignorance about fundamental social realities. "Sweetie, there's nothing artificial about the differences between people whose families built this community and people who depend on charity to participate in institutions they could never afford on their own." The attack was perfectly calibrated to strike at every aspect of Sarah's situation that might create feelings of shame or inadequacy. Victoria had identified the scholarship as Sarah's most vulnerable point, and was systematically exploiting it to create maximum psychological damage, while demonstrating to the audience that even the most confident outsiders could be reduced to humiliation through skillful application of social pressure. Brittany moved closer with her camera equipment, sensing that the confrontation was approaching its climax and wanting to ensure she captured every moment of Sarah's expected breakdown for later distribution through social media channels. Her documentation would serve multiple purposes, providing entertainment for Westfield Academy's social networks, while also creating permanent evidence of Victoria's dominance that could be used to discourage future challenges to her authority. Sarah felt her sensei's teachings flowing through her consciousness, reminding her that martial artists were distinguished by their ability to remain centered and calm, regardless of external pressures or provocations. Master Tanaka had repeatedly emphasized that true strength was demonstrated through maintaining dignity and composure, even when opponents attempted to trigger emotional reactions that would lead to poor decisions. "You're right that my family couldn't afford Westfield Academy's tuition," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent hallway with unexpected strength. "But I earned my place here through academic achievement, community service, and standardized test scores that placed me in the 99th percentile nationally. That scholarship represents recognition of merit, not charity." The simple statement of fact carried implications that went far beyond Sarah's personal situation, challenging the fundamental assumptions that allowed students like Victoria to claim superior worth based on inherited wealth rather than personal accomplishment. Sarah's academic credentials were publicly documented and undeniable, making it impossible for Victoria to dismiss her presence at Westfield Academy as mere charity without implicitly criticizing the institution's selection process. Victoria's expression hardened as she realized that her standard intimidation tactics were not only failing to break Sarah's confidence, but were actually allowing the scholarship girl to articulate positions that made Victoria's behavior appear petty and cruel rather than justified by legitimate social authority. The audience was beginning to shift its sympathies, and Victoria knew she needed to escalate to more direct forms of dominance before her reputation suffered permanent damage. "Merit," Victoria said, her voice taking on the kind of cold precision that Sarah recognized from opponents who were transitioning from psychological warfare to more aggressive forms of attack. Let me teach you something about real merit, scholarship girl. Academic scores and community service projects are just words on paper, but character is revealed through how people handle real pressure. The shift in Victoria's tone and body language sent clear signals to Marcus and Brittany that the psychological phase of their operation was ending and that more direct action was required to achieve their objectives. Marcus's expression became more focused as he prepared to provide whatever physical intimidation might be necessary, while Brittany adjusted her camera position to ensure optimal documentation of whatever humiliation Victoria was planning. "Since you seem to think you belong here based on academic achievement," Victoria continued, her smile becoming sharp enough to cut glass, "perhaps it's time for a more practical examination of whether you really understand what it means to be part of the Westfield Academy community." Sarah's martial arts training had taught her to recognize the signs that preceded physical confrontations, and everything about Victoria's group dynamics indicated that the situation was about to escalate beyond verbal harassment to actual assault. Her body automatically began the subtle preparations that would allow her to respond effectively if violence became necessary, while her mind continued seeking ways to de-escalate the conflict without revealing capabilities that would create additional complications. "I'm always interested in learning," Sarah replied, her voice maintaining its calm professionalism despite the obvious threat implicit in Victoria's words. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Victoria's laugh was like breaking crystal, beautiful and dangerous. "Oh, I think a little hands-on education would be perfect. You see, scholarship girl, academic achievement means nothing if you can't handle the social pressures that come with trying to fit in where you don't belong." The challenge was delivered with perfect timing and maximum psychological impact, designed to force Sarah into either accepting whatever humiliation Victoria had planned, or appearing weak by attempting to avoid confrontation. Victoria had constructed a scenario where any response Sarah gave would either result in degradation that would destroy her social standing or retreat that would confirm her inferior status within Westfield Academy's hierarchy. Marcus moved closer, his massive frame now clearly positioned to prevent Sarah from leaving the area around her locker, while Victoria prepared whatever demonstration she had planned to reassert her dominance. His size advantage was overwhelming from a conventional perspective, and his confident expression suggested that he had never encountered serious resistance to his physical intimidation tactics. "The thing about real education," Marcus added, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that suggested he was accustomed to using his size to resolve disagreements in his favor, "is that some lessons can only be learned through direct experience. Academic knowledge is fine for classrooms, but social understanding requires more practical instruction." Brittany's camera was now recording continuously, capturing every nuance of the developing confrontation for later analysis and distribution. Her position allowed her to document both the psychological pressure being applied to Sarah and the audience's reactions to Victoria's systematic destruction of someone who had dared to challenge the established social order. Sarah looked around at the faces of her classmates, noting the mixture of fear, excitement, and anticipation that characterized audiences for psychological violence. Some students appeared uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, but lacked the courage to intervene on behalf of someone they barely knew. Others seemed genuinely entertained by the prospect of watching Victoria demonstrate her power through the public humiliation of an outsider who had overestimated her place in their exclusive community. "I'm ready to learn whatever you think I need to know," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent hallway with the kind of calm authority that surprised everyone who heard it. "But I hope your educational methods are more constructive than destructive." Victoria's smile became radiant as she realized that Sarah was not going to retreat or submit, providing the perfect justification for whatever escalation Victoria deemed necessary to maintain her position as Westfield Academy's undisputed social authority. The scholarship girl's continued resistance was actually making Victoria's task easier by allowing her to frame whatever happened next as justified response to defiance, rather than unprovoked aggression against someone who posed no real threat. "Oh, sweetie," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded hallway with theatrical sweetness that made her words more ominous rather than reassuring. "I think you're going to find this lesson very memorable indeed. Sometimes the most important education happens outside the classroom." The dismissal was clear. But Sarah understood that it represented preparation for action rather than an end to the confrontation. Victoria Sterling had just announced her intention to escalate beyond psychological warfare, and Sarah found herself in the familiar position of having to choose between submission and resistance, while surrounded by opponents who had no idea what they were actually dealing with. As the school day officially ended and students began moving toward the exits, Victoria's group maintained their positions around Sarah's locker with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested they had planned this confrontation carefully and were prepared to follow through regardless of potential consequences. The hallway crowd provided both audience and cover for whatever demonstration Victoria intended to stage. Michael Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the gathering crowd, his expression mixing concern with determination as he recognized that Sarah was facing a situation that required support despite the personal risks involved in opposing Victoria Sterling's authority. His presence provided moral reinforcement for Sarah, while also making him a potential secondary target for Victoria's psychological operations. "Sarah," Michael called out, his voice carrying clearly across the tension-filled space. "Ready to head to the library for our history project research?" The intervention was perfectly timed and diplomatically phrased, offering Sarah an escape route that didn't require her to appear afraid, while also demonstrating that she had allies who were willing to risk Victoria's displeasure to support their friendships. Michael's approach showed both courage and tactical intelligence that impressed Sarah even as she recognized that accepting his help might increase the danger he faced. Victoria's expression shifted as she processed this unexpected development, realizing that Sarah's resistance was not entirely isolated, and that other students might be emboldened to challenge her authority if she failed to demonstrate complete dominance over the situation. Michael's intervention represented exactly the kind of social support that could transform individual defiance into broader resistance to her carefully maintained control. "How sweet," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false warmth as she turned her attention toward Michael with the kind of predatory focus that had destroyed the social standing of numerous previous targets. "Michael Rodriguez, isn't it? I didn't realize you had developed such close friendships with our scholarship students." The shift in Victoria's attention created a tactical opportunity for Sarah, while also placing Michael in immediate danger from someone whose psychological warfare capabilities had proven devastatingly effective against previous opponents. Sarah's protective instincts, honed through years of martial arts training that emphasized defending others, immediately focused on preventing Michael from becoming collateral damage in Victoria's campaign against her. "Michael and I are working together on a history project about social movements and institutional change," Sarah said, drawing Victoria's attention back to herself while providing Michael with diplomatic cover for his support. "It's fascinating how established power structures sometimes resist challenges even when those challenges are based on legitimate principles." The academic framing of their relationship served multiple purposes, establishing intellectual rather than purely social reasons for their association, while also delivering a subtle message about the historical context of resistance to unjust authority. Sarah's response demonstrated both strategic thinking and genuine concern for Michael's safety that impressed observers who were beginning to understand that the quiet scholarship girl possessed more depth and strength than they had initially assumed. Victoria's smile became even more dangerous as she realized that Sarah was actively protecting her ally while simultaneously challenging Victoria's authority through historical parallels that made her behavior appear petty and antiquated rather than justified by legitimate social position. The scholarship girl's intellectual sophistication was proving more difficult to counter than Victoria had anticipated. "Social movements and institutional change," Victoria repeated mockingly, her tone suggesting that Sarah's academic interests revealed naive idealism rather than serious intellectual engagement. "How perfectly appropriate for someone who thinks academic achievements qualify them to challenge established social realities." Marcus stepped closer to Michael, using his size advantage to create psychological pressure, while demonstrating that Victoria's group was prepared to expand their campaign beyond Sarah to include anyone who supported her resistance to their authority. His massive frame cast a shadow over Michael's smaller build, and his expression suggested that he was looking forward to the opportunity to demonstrate his physical dominance over multiple targets. "The thing about social movements," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of condescending patience that adults used when explaining reality to idealistic children, "is that they only succeed when they have real power behind them. Academic theories are fine for classroom discussions, but changing actual institutions requires resources and connections that scholarship students don't possess." Brittany moved to capture the expanding confrontation from multiple angles, recognizing that the inclusion of additional targets would make her documentation more valuable for social media distribution, while also providing evidence of Victoria's ability to control situations even when faced with organized resistance. Her camera work was becoming more sophisticated as she anticipated the climactic moments that would define this confrontation. Sarah's assessment of the tactical situation indicated that Victoria's group was prepared to escalate their campaign to include physical intimidation of anyone who supported her, transforming what had begun as personal harassment into a broader demonstration of power that would affect multiple students. Her martial arts training had taught her that protecting others sometimes required accepting greater personal risk, but also that strategic thinking could minimize danger for everyone involved. "You're right that changing institutions requires resources," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite its measured tone. "But history shows that the most significant changes often begin with individuals who refuse to accept unjust treatment, regardless of their position in existing power structures." The response demonstrated both intellectual sophistication and personal courage that was beginning to influence the audience's perception of the confrontation. Students who had initially expected to witness Sarah's humiliation were instead observing a thoughtful and articulate defense of principles that many of them privately supported but lacked the courage to express publicly. Michael moved closer to Sarah's position, his expression reflecting determination to maintain their partnership despite the obvious personal risks involved in continuing to oppose Victoria's authority. "Sarah's absolutely right," he said, his voice steady despite the intimidating presence of Marcus's massive frame looming over him. "Some principles are worth defending regardless of the personal cost." The declaration of solidarity was exactly what Victoria had hoped to avoid, as it demonstrated that Sarah's resistance was inspiring others to question the social order that Victoria depended on for her authority. Michael's courage was creating the possibility that other students might find the strength to challenge behavior they privately recognized as cruel and unjustified. Victoria's expression hardened as she realized that her standard intimidation tactics were not only failing to break Sarah's resistance, but were actually creating martyrs whose courage might inspire broader opposition to her carefully maintained control. The situation was becoming more complex and dangerous than she had anticipated, requiring more dramatic action to reassert her dominance before her reputation suffered irreparable damage. "How noble," Victoria said, her voice taking on the kind of cold precision that preceded her most devastating psychological attacks. Two scholarship cases standing up for each other against the social realities that determine their actual place in this community. Perhaps it's time for a more direct lesson in how power actually works at Westfield Academy. The threat was delivered, with theatrical timing designed to maximize its psychological impact while providing justification for whatever escalation Victoria deemed necessary to maintain her position. Her smile was radiant and absolutely predatory as she prepared to demonstrate that academic achievement and moral courage were insufficient protection against someone with her resources and willingness to use them. Sarah's martial arts training had taught her to recognize the moment when verbal confrontation transformed into physical aggression, and everything about Victoria's body language indicated that the psychological phase of this conflict was ending. Her sensei had repeatedly emphasized that true warriors prepared for violence while hoping to avoid it, maintaining readiness without abandoning efforts to find peaceful solutions. "Before you begin whatever lesson you have planned," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the silent hallway with unexpected authority, "perhaps you should consider whether the education you're about to provide is really worth the consequences that might follow." The warning was delivered with calm professionalism that suggested Sarah possessed knowledge or capabilities that Victoria had not anticipated in her planning. Several students in the audience exchanged uncertain glances, beginning to sense that the confrontation might not proceed according to Victoria's expectations. Victoria's laugh was like ice cracking, beautiful and sharp enough to make people shiver. "Consequences? Oh, sweetie. The only consequences that matter at Westfield Academy are the ones that affect people who don't understand their place in the established order. I think you're about to receive a very thorough education in social reality." The final challenge was delivered with perfect timing and maximum psychological impact, designed to force Sarah into either accepting whatever humiliation Victoria had planned or revealing whatever hidden resources she might possess to defend herself. Victoria had constructed a scenario where Sarah's response would either confirm her inferior status or expose capabilities that could be used against her in future confrontations. Marcus moved into position beside Victoria, his massive frame clearly prepared to provide whatever physical support might be necessary to complete their demonstration of dominance. His expression suggested confidence that size and aggression would prevail over any resistance that Sarah might attempt, while his positioning blocked her most direct escape routes. Brittany's camera was now recording continuously from multiple angles, ensuring that whatever happened next would be documented with professional quality for maximum social media impact. Her equipment captured not only the main confrontation, but also the audience's reactions and the broader social dynamics that surrounded Victoria's assertion of authority over someone who had dared to challenge her position. Sarah looked around at the faces of her classmates one final time, noting the mixture of fear, excitement, and anticipation that characterized audiences for violence, whether psychological or physical. She thought about Michael's courage in supporting her despite the personal risks, about her sensei's teachings regarding the responsibility to protect others, and about the principles that her parents had taught her were more important than personal safety or social acceptance. "I understand," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded hallway despite its measured tone. "You want to teach me about power and social reality. I'm ready to learn whatever you think I need to know." Victoria's smile became triumphant as she realized that Sarah was not going to retreat or submit, providing perfect justification for whatever demonstration Victoria had planned to reassert her absolute authority over Westfield Academy's social hierarchy. The scholarship girl's continued resistance was actually making Victoria's task easier by allowing her to frame what happened next as justified response to defiance rather than unprovoked aggression. "Excellent," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the silent hallway with the kind of theatrical satisfaction that suggested she had been looking forward to this moment throughout their entire confrontation. "Class is now in session, scholarship girl. Pay attention, because this lesson will determine how you spend the rest of your time at Westfield Academy." The announcement was delivered with perfect timing, designed to maximize dramatic impact, while establishing clear justification for whatever action Victoria deemed necessary to maintain her position as the school's undisputed social authority. Her positioning and body language indicated that the psychological warfare phase of their conflict had officially ended and that more direct forms of domination were about to begin. Sarah's martial arts training automatically assessed the tactical situation, noting positions, distances, potential weapons, escape routes, and the probable sequence of events that would follow Victoria's decision to escalate beyond verbal harassment. Her body prepared for combat while her mind continued seeking ways to minimize damage to herself, to Michael, and to innocent bystanders who might be affected by whatever violence was about to unfold. The hallway fell into complete silence as everyone present recognized that they were about to witness something significant, though most had no idea that the quiet scholarship girl they expected to see humiliated possessed years of training that had prepared her for exactly this type of confrontation. The stage was set for a demonstration of power that would indeed change everything at Westfield Academy, though not in the way that Victoria Sterling had planned. Victoria Sterling's hand moved with calculated precision, cutting through the air with the sharp crack of palm-meeting cheek that echoed off the marble walls like a gunshot. The slap landed with enough force to snap Sarah's head to the side, leaving a bright red handprint across her face that would be visible for hours. The sound reverberated through the suddenly silent hallway as dozens of students watched in stunned disbelief at the brazen assault that had just occurred in full view of security cameras and potential faculty witnesses. "There's your first lesson in reality, scholarship girl," Victoria announced, her voice ringing with triumphant satisfaction as she flexed her fingers and prepared to deliver another blow. "Some people need to learn their place through direct experience rather than polite conversation." The second slap came even harder than the first, Victoria's manicured hand striking Sarah's other cheek with enough force to make several observers wince sympathetically. Brittany's camera captured every moment in high definition, documenting the assault from multiple angles while other students pulled out their phones to record what they assumed would be Sarah's complete breakdown and humiliation. Marcus stepped closer with his massive frame towering over Sarah's smaller build, his expression mixing anticipation with cruel satisfaction as he prepared to provide whatever additional intimidation might be necessary to complete their demonstration of dominance. His positioning blocked Sarah's escape routes while creating additional psychological pressure through the implied threat of even more severe physical consequences if she dared to resist. "Maybe now you understand how things really work around here," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of casual menace that suggested he was accustomed to using physical force to resolve conflicts in his favor. "Academic achievements don't mean much when you're dealing with people who have real power." Sarah stood perfectly still for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, her face stinging from the dual impacts while her mind processed what had just occurred. The physical pain was minimal, compared to the psychological assault that Victoria had attempted through public humiliation. But something fundamental had shifted in the confrontation that would change everything that followed. Years of martial arts training had taught Sarah to remain calm under pressure, to assess threats accurately, and to respond with precisely the amount of force necessary to neutralize aggression without causing unnecessary harm. Master Tanaka's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that true martial artists were distinguished by their restraint and wisdom, rather than by their ability to inflict damage on opponents who had underestimated their capabilities. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the silent hallway despite its measured tone. "That was very educational." Victoria's triumphant expression flickered with uncertainty as she processed Sarah's unexpected response to physical assault. The scholarship girl's calm acceptance of violence was not producing the fear, tears, or desperate pleas for mercy that Victoria had anticipated based on her previous experiences with intimidating weaker students. "I hope you learned something useful," Victoria replied, raising her hand to deliver another slap that would ensure complete submission and social destruction. "Because this lesson isn't over until you understand your proper place in our community." Sarah's movement was so fluid and economical that most observers missed the precise mechanics of what happened next. Victoria's descending hand was intercepted by a defensive block that redirected its momentum, while Sarah's other hand delivered a controlled strike to Victoria's solar plexus that folded the larger girl forward with a sharp exhale of surprise and pain. The counterattack lasted less than 2 seconds and left Victoria stumbling backward into Marcus's bulk while struggling to regain her breath and process what had just occurred. Sarah remained in the exact position she had occupied before Victoria's attempted third slap, her posture relaxed, and her expression calm, as if deflecting assault and delivering precise counterstrike required no more effort than swatting away an annoying insect. "As I said," Sarah continued in the same quiet tone, "that was very educational. I learned that some people believe physical violence is an acceptable way to resolve social disagreements. I also learned that those same people are often unprepared for opponents who can defend themselves effectively." The hallway erupted into chaos as students processed what they had just witnessed. Phones captured every moment from multiple angles, while excited conversations spread news of the confrontation throughout Westfield Academy's social networks with viral speed. The quiet scholarship girl had just demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally altered the power dynamics that had governed the school's social hierarchy. Marcus moved forward aggressively, his massive frame clearly intended to overwhelm Sarah through sheer size and strength. His approach lacked tactical sophistication but compensated through intimidating physical presence that had proven effective against previous opponents who relied on verbal resistance rather than actual fighting skills. "You just made a huge mistake," Marcus growled, reaching out to grab Sarah's shoulders with hands large enough to completely encircle her upper arms. Nobody puts their hands on Victoria Sterling without facing serious consequences. Sarah's response was a perfect demonstration of the principles that Master Tanaka had drilled into his students through years of repetitive practice. She sidestepped Marcus's reaching hands while executing a textbook hip throw that used his own momentum and weight against him, sending 200 pounds of quarterback crashing into the row of lockers with a metallic boom that echoed throughout the building. The technique was executed with such precise timing and leverage that Sarah appeared to barely exert herself, while redirecting Marcus's aggressive charge into a devastating collision with immovable metal surfaces. He slid down the lockers in a daze, leaving a Marcus-shaped dent in the metal while struggling to understand how someone half his size had just tossed him around like a practice dummy. "I tried to avoid physical confrontation," Sarah said, her voice maintaining its calm professionalism despite having just neutralized 2 opponents in rapid succession. "But when people choose violence as their preferred method of communication, they should be prepared for their opponents to respond with equal competence." Victoria struggled to regain her composure while processing the impossible reality that her carefully planned demonstration of dominance had been reversed by someone she had dismissed as a weak target. The scholarship girl was supposed to be cowering in humiliation, not standing calmly over Marcus's sprawled form while delivering philosophical observations about conflict resolution. "This isn't over," Victoria gasped, still struggling to catch her breath from Sarah's precisely placed strike. "My family has connections throughout this city. You have no idea what kind of trouble you just brought on yourself and your pathetic scholarship status." Sarah's expression remained calm as she considered Victoria's threat, recognizing it as the desperate response of someone whose entire identity was based on intimidating others through social position rather than personal capability. Her martial arts training had taught her that the most dangerous opponents were often those who possessed resources but lacked the character to use them responsibly. "I understand that your family has influence," Sarah replied quietly, "but I hope you'll consider whether using that influence to retaliate against someone who defended herself from physical assault reflects the kind of character that Westfield Academy hopes to develop in its students." Brittany had continued recording throughout the entire confrontation, her camera capturing Sarah's defensive techniques from multiple angles while documenting the complete reversal of power dynamics that had just occurred. Her usual confidence in Victoria's invincibility was rapidly being replaced by recognition that this footage could either destroy Sarah's reputation or transform her into a viral sensation, depending on how the narrative was constructed. Michael Rodriguez pushed through the crowd of observers to reach Sarah's position, his expression mixing admiration with concern about the potential consequences of what had just transpired. "Sarah, are you okay?" he asked, noting the red marks on her cheeks from Victoria's slaps, while also assessing whether she had sustained any injuries during the brief but intense confrontation. "I'm fine," Sarah assured him, though she remained alert for any indication that Victoria's group might attempt additional attacks. Sometimes people need to learn that physical aggression produces consequences they haven't anticipated. The crowd of students continued growing as word spread throughout the building about the confrontation that had just redefined social relationships at Westfield Academy. Teachers and administrators would inevitably investigate the disturbance, but the viral documentation would ensure that accurate accounts of the incident reached authority figures before Victoria could construct alternative narratives that portrayed her as the victim. Principal Dr. Margaret Foster arrived within minutes, accompanied by security personnel and several faculty members who had been alerted by the commotion echoing through the building. Her expression reflected both professional concern about student safety and administrative frustration about managing conflicts that could affect the school's reputation and legal liability. "What exactly happened here?" Dr. Foster demanded, her authoritative voice cutting through the excited chatter of student observers who were still processing the dramatic confrontation they had witnessed. "Victoria Sterling physically assaulted Sarah Chen," Michael reported immediately, his voice carrying clearly across the crowded hallway. "She slapped Sarah twice in front of dozens of witnesses, and when Sarah defended herself, Marcus Thompson attempted to escalate the violence further." Dr. Foster's expression hardened as she processed this information while observing the obvious evidence of physical confrontation scattered around the hallway. Marcus was still sitting against the dented lockers, while Victoria continued struggling to regain her breath and composure from Sarah's precisely executed defensive techniques. "Is this accurate?" Dr. Foster asked Sarah directly, recognizing that the scholarship student's account would carry significant weight in any official investigation of the incident. "Victoria Sterling slapped me twice without provocation," Sarah confirmed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "When she attempted to strike me a third time, I blocked her attack and responded with minimal force necessary to stop the assault. Marcus Thompson then attempted to grab me, and I used defensive techniques to prevent him from completing his attack." The clinical accuracy of Sarah's report impressed Dr. Foster, who recognized the difference between emotional reactions and professional testimony that would be valuable in formal disciplinary proceedings. The scholarship student's calm demeanor and precise language suggested someone who understood both her rights and her responsibilities in conflict situations. Brittany Walsh found herself in an unexpected position as her documentation of Victoria's assault became evidence that could be used against her friends rather than ammunition for destroying their target. Her camera had captured clear footage of Victoria initiating physical violence against someone who had been attempting to avoid confrontation through verbal de-escalation. "I have everything recorded," Brittany announced, though her voice lacked its usual confidence as she realized that her evidence could result in serious disciplinary action against Victoria and Marcus. The whole confrontation is documented from multiple angles. Dr. Foster's expression became grimly satisfied as she recognized that objective evidence would make this investigation much simpler than the typical he-said-she-said conflicts that usually followed student confrontations. Video documentation would eliminate any possibility of disputed facts or alternative narratives that might complicate disciplinary proceedings. "Ms. Walsh, I'll need you to provide that footage to the administration immediately," Dr. Foster instructed. "This matter will be investigated thoroughly, and any student found to have initiated physical violence will face serious consequences regardless of their family connections or social position." Victoria's face drained of color as she began to understand that her assault on Sarah had been thoroughly documented and would result in formal disciplinary action that could affect her academic record and college applications. Her family's influence at Westfield Academy was considerable, but not sufficient to override clear evidence of unprovoked physical violence against another student. "This is ridiculous," Victoria protested, though her voice lacked its usual confident authority. "Sarah Chen doesn't belong here anyway. She's just a charity case who thinks academic achievements give her the right to disrespect her social superiors." Dr. Foster's expression became ice-cold as she processed Victoria's attempt to justify physical assault through social prejudice. "Miss Sterling, your attitude toward fellow students based on their financial circumstances is exactly the kind of behavior that Westfield Academy does not tolerate from any member of our community." Sarah watched the rapid transformation of the situation with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that Victoria's own actions and words were destroying her position more effectively than any external opposition could have achieved. The predator who had terrorized other students through psychological manipulation was discovering that some prey possessed both the capability and the legal protection to defend themselves effectively. "I think this incident demonstrates the importance of treating all community members with respect regardless of their background," Sarah observed quietly. "Violence is never an appropriate response to social disagreements, and I hope everyone learned something valuable from what happened here today." Marcus Thompson finally struggled to his feet, though his equilibrium remained compromised from his collision with the lockers. His usual swagger had been replaced by bewildered respect for someone who had casually demonstrated superior fighting skills despite appearing completely unassuming in normal circumstances. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Marcus asked, his voice mixing curiosity with grudging admiration for Sarah's technical competence. "That wasn't just lucky self-defense. You knew exactly what you were doing." Sarah considered her response carefully, recognizing that revealing too much about her martial arts background might create unwanted attention while also understanding that some explanation was necessary to prevent wild speculation about her training and capabilities. "I've studied traditional martial arts since childhood," Sarah replied simply. "My sensei taught me that the best way to handle conflicts is through avoiding them, but that everyone should be prepared to defend themselves and others when peaceful solutions aren't possible." Dr. Foster nodded approvingly at Sarah's explanation, recognizing both the disciplined training that had produced her precise defensive techniques and the mature philosophy that had guided her responses throughout the confrontation. The scholarship student had demonstrated exactly the kind of character and judgment that Westfield Academy hoped to develop in all its students. "Ms. Chen, I'm impressed by your restraint and professionalism throughout this incident," Dr. Foster said formally. "You defended yourself appropriately without escalating the violence unnecessarily, and your conduct reflects well on our school's values and expectations." The official recognition of Sarah's character and conduct provided perfect contrast to Victoria's behavior, highlighting the difference between privilege based on family wealth and respect earned through personal integrity and capability. The social dynamics at Westfield Academy had been permanently altered by this confrontation, with authority figures now aware of the toxic behavior that had previously flourished without adult supervision. Victoria Sterling's reign of psychological terror at Westfield Academy effectively ended that afternoon as news of her assault on Sarah Chen spread throughout the school's social networks, along with video evidence of her humiliating defeat. Her family's influence prevented expulsion, but the disciplinary action included suspension, mandatory anger management counseling, and community service that destroyed her carefully maintained image of superiority. Marcus Thompson's athletic career survived the incident, but his reputation as an intimidating enforcer, was permanently damaged by footage of him being effortlessly thrown into lockers by someone half his size. College recruiters began questioning his character and judgment, while teammates lost respect for someone who had attempted to use physical violence against a female student. Brittany Walsh discovered that her documentation of the confrontation had transformed her from Victoria's loyal intelligence operative into an unwilling witness whose evidence was being used to destroy her former allies. Her social media empire collapsed as followers abandoned someone associated with unprovoked assault against scholarship students. Sarah Chen became an overnight sensation as footage of her defensive techniques went viral throughout Westfield Academy's social networks and beyond. Students who had previously ignored her existence now approached her with respect and curiosity about her martial arts training, while faculty members praised her restraint and professionalism under pressure. Michael Rodriguez's courage in supporting Sarah during the confrontation earned him recognition as someone willing to stand up for his principles regardless of social pressure. Their friendship deepened into a partnership that extended beyond academic collaboration to include mutual support for other students facing harassment or discrimination. Dr. Foster implemented comprehensive anti-bullying policies that specifically addressed social intimidation based on economic status, ensuring that future students would be protected from the kind of systematic harassment that Victoria's group had employed against perceived social inferiors. The scholarship program at Westfield Academy expanded significantly as community leaders recognized the value of academic merit over inherited privilege, creating opportunities for other deserving students to access educational resources regardless of their family's financial circumstances. Sarah's sensei, Master Tanaka, was invited to Westfield Academy to conduct seminars on conflict resolution and self-defense, sharing martial arts philosophy that emphasized discipline, respect, and the responsibility that came with physical capabilities. His teachings resonated with students and faculty, who recognized the wisdom behind traditional approaches to character development. Years later, Sarah would reflect on that afternoon as the moment when she learned that standing up for principles sometimes required accepting risks that seemed overwhelming at the time. The quiet scholarship girl who had tried so hard to remain invisible had discovered that some battles were worth fighting, not for personal victory, but for the protection of values that made communities stronger and more inclusive. Victoria Sterling had set out to destroy someone she perceived as inferior and unworthy of respect, never realizing that she was actually attacking someone whose strength came from years of disciplined training and moral development that had prepared her to defend herself and others against precisely the kind of cruelty that Victoria represented. In the end, the bullies who had thought they could humiliate the shy girl through physical violence had learned that some people were prepared to respond to aggression with techniques that turned size and intimidation into liabilities rather than advantages. Sarah Chen had kept her composure throughout the confrontation, but she had also demonstrated that respect could not be demanded through violence, and that true strength came from character rather than from family wealth or social position. The lesson that echoed through Westfield Academy's hallways for years afterward was simple but profound. Never assume that quiet people are weak, never mistake kindness for vulnerability, and never underestimate someone whose strength comes from discipline, training, and principles that are worth defending regardless of the personal cost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.